Welcome back. Hope you made it across to this session for an address by the Honourable Willie Jackson MP, the Minister for Maori Development and Associate Minister for Justice in New Zealand. Now, you might recall 3 weeks ago at the first conference event, we had messages delivered on behalf of Prime Minister Morrison and Prime Minister Ardern by Ministers Wyatt and Mahuta, respectively. And those helped set the scene for Event 1 to define partnerships, to share the big picture and provide a framework for the events that have followed. There was one other minister scheduled to appear that day, but he had a pretty reasonable excuse to be absent, and that was that he was caught up in a COVID lockdown in Auckland. However, Willie Jackson is now out of lockdown and still keen to participate today. If you haven't read his bio or checked out any of the links in the on-air platform, here's a snapshot. He is the Minister for Maori Development and holds a couple of other portfolios as well, but this is really the portfolio that he's been gearing up for his whole life. He grew up in Porirua and South Auckland. He previously worked as a trade union organiser, a record company executive, a broadcaster, a sports talkback radio host, and of course, a Maori advocate with a focus on community development, particularly in South Auckland. Here's the message that the Minister wanted to share with us for today's closing event.
A tēnā koutou, a tuatahi e tika me mihi ki tō tātou matu i te rangi, nāna nei ngā mea katoa. A tuarua ka huri a tātou whakaaro ki ngā mate, nō reira ngā mate haere ki tērā wāhi i whakarere ai te kaihana mō tātou. A ka nui tēnā ki a koutou, tēnei te mihi ki a koutou i tēnei wā, he honore nui ki te kōrero, e pāne ki tēnei kaupapa tino whakahirehire i tēnei wā, tēnei te tino honore a tēnā koutou, a tēnā no tātou katoa. Kia ora, and it's a real privilege to give this keynote kōrero or keynote speech to the conference today as the Minister for Māori Development here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This is a ministry that I'm very proud to hold, and I follow in the footsteps of some great former Māori ministers like Apirana Ngata, who's one of our legendary ministers, Peter Sharples, who was the head, Parekura Horamea. We've had some wonderful Māori ministers, and we've had former prime ministers also who've held this position. So it really is an honour to give a bit of a kōrero and a perspective here today to everyone who's watching. Ngā mihi kia koutou, kia ora koutou. First of all, to our brothers and sisters over there in Aotearoa, not over in Aotearoa, over there in Australia, our Indigenous people over there, the First Nation people. Ngā mihi kia koutou, we know about the struggles that you've gone through, the years and with land rights and rights everyday rights. We know what a fight it's been, and I just want to mihi to you for your fight and all the great activists who've pushed the line, in groups like Youth Yindi, and I remember Mike Mansell, who was one of the great Aboriginal lawyers coming over here and working with activists here. This is a big mihi to you, the Indigenous people, for your fight, and continue with that work, continue with that mahi. There's a lot of support from Māori people here. Also today to the Australian New Zealand School of Government attendees, ngā mihi kia koutou. Also to government officials, tēnā koutou for your work and for your support. It really is a privilege to speak about the importance of the relationships between Indigenous people and the government. It's an area I'm passionate about. I've spent decades inside and outside government fighting for transitional change for Māori. And that's the point. When you come to Parliament or government, you have to take a bit of a different perspective. It's a bit easier when you're out there as an activist criticising government all the time. That's easy. But when you come in, you have to find ways of getting outputs. You have to, at times, curb your natural instincts. Otherwise, the outputs are limited, and all you're going to get into is a war and a fight. So, whilst we carry strong views, if you want to get change and if you want to get deals, you've got to compromise sometimes with party colleagues and people on the other side of the house. So it's always a challenge. An Indigenous perspective is even more important now that we are in this whole COVID-19 mess. And it is a mess, isn't it? This COVID-19 mess, or it's a mess, it's a disaster. It's something that none of us would have envisaged a year or so back. But we must ensure Indigenous people are on a more equitable footing through the recovery. Indigenous people are often located at the centre of issues vital to our collective well-being. Issues like the sustainable development of our lands and waters, mitigating and adapting to climate change, and nurturing resilient generations of people who hold the tools for leading better lives. Our country, Aotearoa New Zealand, is guided in this mission by Te Treaty o Waitangi. This treaty was signed between Māori and the Crown, British Crown, in 1840. While it has not always been used in the way it was intended, it's a founding document that sets the base for partnership here. As a country, we announced our support for the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in 2010. The rights in the declaration align with the guarantee of what we call tino rangatiratanga, or self-determination to Māori under the treaty. Our government intends to uphold the promises of the treaty, and this means restoring some of the balance between Māori and the Crown. In 2018, we established the Office of Māori Crown Relations. That's called Te Arawhiti. The agency is focused on rethinking the future relationship between Māori and the Crown. We have made progress on our treaty settlement process, providing a forum to recognise the Crown's historical breaches of the treaty. Now that process has been criticised too by some of our activists who have said that our tribes or our people get far too little. In fact, the actual number that we came up with is probably 2% of the actual land loss is what tribes got, or is what different people got. But our people have adopted a pragmatic view on this and said, well, that's better than nothing. And what you see now is tribes who picked up minimal compensation are now super, not so much super rich, but some of them might be super rich, because you're talking about $1 billion plus tribes in some areas, and yet they took compensation at only 2% of the loss. For instance, our big tribe, Ngai Tahu, and our two big tribes, they did $170 million treaty settlements, and the value of the loss was valued at over 18 billion. But they took their 170 million so that they could build where they are today, and now they're in $1 billion territory. So, there's a sacrifice, but sometimes the sacrifice is worth it if it gives our people an opportunity to exhibit what we call tino rangatiratanga, and obviously opportunity today. We're participating actively in what we call kaupapa inquiries led by our Waitangi Tribunal, and we're investigating contemporary issues like mana wahine, which is the customary roles and relationship of Māori women to the land, to the whenua, to whakapapa and mātauranga, which is knowledge. And I'm overseeing that claim with our Minister of Women's Affairs, Jan Tinetti. We continue to work on reforms balancing the need for appropriate protections with opportunities for sustainable development, such as the legislation governing Māori land, that's called Te Turu Whenua and the RMA, Resource Management Act. And a recent example of this is a bill passed to remove unequitable barriers to the establishment of Māori wards on councils. These are dedicated Māori seats that enable the establishment of Māori seats in local government bodies, which are strong features of our democracy and reflect the partnership on which this country has been built. It's absolutely paramount we have Māori leadership advocating for Māori in decision-making realms like local government. This is something I've been proud to fight for the last 20 years, and I'm proud to work with our local body minister, Nanaia Mahuta, with the work she's done to get the bill across the line. When we think about Indigenous leadership and self-determination, I must talk about the resolute action we continue to see during the pandemic. This immediate response to COVID-19 reinforced the importance of collaboration and coordination between government and Māori. Our Māori organisations develop locally tailored solutions to assist the vulnerable within their communities. Who knows our communities best? Our groups, our local groups, our Māori provider groups. As well as that, many tribal organisations have worked in tandem, obviously, with our people, and they've provided funding for some of these initiatives. For example, Te Ropu Whakakaupapa Uruta, that's the National Māori Pandemic Group. It was independently formed by Māori medical and health experts, including primary care specialists, public health experts, public health physicians, Māori nurses and iwi leaders. The group provided Māori, including Māori health practitioners, with access to tailored and relevant information, resources and practical guidance and advice on how to manage the pandemic. In Auckland, our largest city, we've been put through our paces 4 times now with the current alert level. But we continue to use those existing relationships and networks to deliver to those that need it. Together, we were and are able to work quickly and innovatively to look after our communities. As the ANZ SOG has rightly identified, strengthening Indigenous leadership and cultural competency in the public sector is critical in lifting the quality of public sector leadership in Australia and in New Zealand. And one of the ways we're going to strengthen the partnership between Māori and the government is developing a plan to measure our progress in addressing Indigenous rights and interests under the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. This must be done through ongoing and meaningful dialogue with iwi, hapu, whānau and wider Māori communities. The government's priorities around economic recovery, responding to climate change, reducing child poverty, and improving access to affordable housing will support improvements in the environment in which Māori can pursue their aspirations. We're seeing more examples of partnership across these spaces that are Indigenous-led, regionally supported and government-enabled. This is a very exciting path for our country. Our declaration and evolving relationship will need to reflect the partnership between the government and Māori. There needs to be a focus on supporting the well-being of Indigenous populations and present a clear path towards the realisation of their self-determination. I want to do this right and take the time needed to ensure the process is consistent with the best practice under the Declaration and the Treaty of Waitangi. We will strengthen Crown Māori relations and partner with iwi, hapu and Māori to find appropriate solutions that will benefit all of Aotearoa. Yes, it's quite a challenge in front of us, and as the Māori Minister, I'm really looking forward to the next 2.5 years. I know that this type of kōrero or this type of talk has been prominent through your conference, but I think that this is the type of kōrero that has to happen between Indigenous peoples. We're not on our own. Our fight is very similar to the Aboriginals' fight, to the American Indians' fight, to Canadian Indians. We are all one in many ways, and that's why when we get opportunities like this, we must take the chance to give some of our experience, to give some of our history, to give some of our background, and to contribute to that overall kaupapa of whānau and Indigenous people working together. It's been a privilege to have a bit of a chat, bit of a kōrero with you today. I hope we can do it again soon. Tēnei te mihi kia koutou. A tēnā koutou, a tēnā koutou, a tēnā koutou katoa.